Taxes are actually a very effective way to influence behavior. Think about tobacco smoking. Many governments have discouraged smoking by taxing cigarettes. The higher the tax, price of cigarettes goes up. Some people smoke less. Some people even stop altogether. So what do governments do? They keep raising cigarette taxes. I don't smoke, but a pack of cigarettes has to cost like $1,000 now, right?
Better Innovation is hosted by Jeff Saviano, EY Global Tax Innovation Leader. This isn't just about innovation. This is better innovation.
Hey, this is Better Innovation. It's me, Jeff Saviano, your host. We are back with another episode from the World Economic Forum in Davos. This episode today is all about climate change. That was one of the leading themes in Davos this year. There was such an outpouring of concern that was expressed by most world leaders who were present. Let me give an example. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he put it really simply when he said, quote, "We will be destroyed by climate change, not the planet," end quote. There was a leading academic expert who explains that an ice-free Arctic region would be just horrible for the planet. There was even a discussion about accounting standards and how they could affect climate change-related risks, and that's now gaining lots of traction. But my favorite climate change initiative from Davos this year is a new initiative called 1T.org. That's 1T.org. That organization wants to either grow, restore, or conserve 1 trillion trees around the world. That's 1 trillion with a T. That's a lot of trees. What a positive impact that would have on our overall carbon footprint. So if you believe in climate change, you'll take some comfort in the dialogue that happened this year in Davos. Climate change has always been really important to me. Back in 2016, thanks to my good friend John Warner, who leads TEDx Beacon Street, one of the largest TEDx franchises in the world, I delivered a talk there called How Taxes Could Save the Planet. As an aside, for all the Better Innovation aficionados listening today, John is the answer to the trivia question, who was the very first guest on our podcast over 3 years ago, late 2016. We were so thrilled to launch Better Innovation with John. Okay, back to climate change. I told 2 stories in this talk. The first was about a tax activist named Barbara Anderson. She effected real change through direct democracy. What is direct democracy? Direct democracy is when you take initiatives right to the people on the ballot in an election. The second story was about a unique approach to climate change that was affected by the Canadian province of British Columbia all the way back in 2008. So you may be asking, how can direct democracy and actions taken by the province of British Columbia positively affect climate change? How do those 2 stories intersect to potentially help us save the planet? Take a listen. Here's my talk from TEDx Beacon Street back in 2016. I hope you enjoyed. Let's face it, nobody likes taxes, right? Nobody. I want to change your perception about taxes. What if I told you that tax policies can help stop bad things from happening, like climate change? While you think about that, I want to tell you a story about a tax activist named Barbara Anderson. I'm so inspired by activists like Barbara. They have this great passion for an issue that can directly affect public policy. Even if you don't agree with their policies, I'll bet you can appreciate, like I do, how they affect change through this tremendous grit and determination that they have. Barbara was a tax crusader from the late 70s, early 80s, from right here in Massachusetts. I'm so sorry to say she passed away earlier this year. She was the leader for over 30 years of this organization called Citizens for Limited Taxation. Anybody venture a guess what they were all about? She was part of a new group of activists at the time who were passionate about keeping taxes low. In 1979, property taxes here were out of control. They were amongst the highest in the nation. Barbara decided to do something about it. She had this idea to cut property taxes, And it came at a time when homeowners in the state were just desperate for some kind of support. So she took this idea to the legislature, where 146 members of the House of Representatives voted against her bill, and only 5 voted for it. The bill wasn't just defeated, it was annihilated. It would have produced a massive tax cut, removing about $1.5 billion out of state coffers. That's $4.5 billion in today's dollars. It was controversial. It pitted homeowners and businesses against labor unions. But that's not surprising, because tax activism is by its nature controversial. Government needs revenue to fund critical services, and let's be honest, we all have an opinion about who should pay for it. Usually we think it's somebody else, right? We'll come back to Barbara and the rest of her story. I was in law school when I first learned about the importance of tax policy. I remember one night I was studying in the library, which just happened to be a couple of steps away from our sports arena. Big college sports arena with a really thin domed roof. In the library, I'm working through this tough tax problem while the Rolling Stones were playing next door. And you could hear every song. It's like they were playing right in the library. I remember thinking, all my buddies are next door watching the Stones, and here I am studying tax policy. That was the night I found my calling. And my passion for tax policy found that night. I guess you could say it's my own beast of burden. I said at the outset, this talk is about climate change. Let me be clear, though. I am not your climate change expert. There have been hundreds of talks and reports by climate scientists and others well before me who have all established what a big problem this is. We know this is true now, right? Some would even say this is undeniable. We've all heard about the massive issues that result from just a 2-degree Celsius increase in global warmth. That's it, 2 degrees. And amazingly, despite the enormity of this problem, we have yet to find a global solution to climate change. We're desperate. We need some kind of a new, innovative approach. Well, there just happens to be one place that may have just figured it out, found a way to significantly mitigate climate change. The Canadian province of British Columbia. In 2008, its political leaders decided to impose a tax on carbon to help prevent climate change. What does that mean? What is carbon? Well, when those fuels that produce harmful greenhouse gases, when they're purchased or used in British Columbia, they're taxed. That tax is kind of like the sales tax that you and I pay on a television or a piece of furniture, except this tax had a unique feature to it. It didn't raise overall tax receipts in the province. It's my kind of tax. But how is that possible? Well, the government realized, it was smart. The government realized in order for the residents to accept this new tax, all the revenue raised had to be given back to the people. And that's what they did. Since this tax began, they have collected $5 billion of carbon tax receipts. And they've given it all, and then some, back to the residents by cutting other taxes. So, 8 years later, what have we learned about this tax? Greenhouse gas emissions in the province are actually down 6.1%. Interesting. What about the rest of Canada? They're up 3.5%. How about those horrible fossil fuels, consumption of fossil fuels? That's down a whopping 16%. 16%, and the rest of Canada is up 3%. These are statistically significant differences. The tax is working. People's behavior and habits changed. They cut the reliance on fossil fuels to avoid the tax. I think that's brilliant, right? Opponents of the tax were worried. They were worried it would stifle the British Columbia economy. Well, economic growth in the province has actually outpaced the rest of Canada since the tax began. And what about the politicians? Usually they don't do well after imposing new big taxes. They did okay. The Liberal Party that put the tax in place actually won a rare third consecutive term the year after the tax began. But most importantly, and I really mean this, most importantly, how did the people feel about it? Taxes are all about the people. How did the people feel about this tax? 54% of the people in British Columbia approved it at the time it was enacted, and that has now since risen to 60%. When have you heard of a tax becoming more popular, right? That just doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, in 2 short months in the neighboring province of Alberta, they're imposing a carbon tax modeled after, you guessed it, British Columbia. Prime Minister Trudeau has pledged to introduce the entire tax across all of Canada beginning in 2018. To economists and tax policy geeks like me, though, this is not overly surprising. I think Ronald Reagan said it best. If you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. So that's the British Columbia story. The question is, how do you reduce those harmful greenhouse gas emissions? I think the answer is simple. You tax them. Taxes are actually a very effective way to influence behavior. Think about tobacco smoking. Many governments have discouraged smoking by taxing cigarettes. The higher the tax, price of cigarettes goes up. Some people smoke less. Some people even stop altogether. So what do governments do? They keep raising cigarette taxes. I don't smoke, but a pack of cigarettes has to cost like $1,000 now, right? Here's one more example. Are you worried about the health of your children? Some local governments are. They're imposing taxes on soda. Yeah, kids, that's right, soda. They're worried about the obesity epidemic. Tax it, we'll buy less of it, and the government thinks our kids will be better off in the long run. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago on Election Day, 4 new soda taxes approved by voters across this country. So if taxes on cigarettes and soda help stop smoking and drinking those sugary beverages, taxing carbon should help the planet, right? Unfortunately, though, the solution is not that simple. If every government around the world taxed carbon, we would avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. But they don't. How can we replicate this British Columbia solution around the world? Let's start here first in the US. Sure, it would be efficient to have a single national tax, but that would mean that the president and Congress would all have to agree to it. That just doesn't seem feasible at the moment, does it? There are similar obstacles in state government, too. We need some other kind of path forward. Okay, I promised you we would return to Barbara and the rest of her story. When we last left Barbara, she was soundly defeated by the legislature, but she didn't give up. She got her idea directly on a November ballot and brought it right to the people. We call that direct democracy, citizen lawmaking. And what happened? 59% of the voters approved her idea into law. The same idea that was annihilated by the legislature. These ballot measures can be an important check and balance on our representative form of government. They're like a safety valve of sorts. Think of it like an open source government, a device to be used when our elected officials are, well, unresponsive to an issue. Or if a legislature is hopelessly gridlocked by partisan politics. Does that ring a bell? Barbara didn't have a law degree. She didn't have any special government training to do what she did. In fact, her only certification was from the YMCA as a lifeguard. She was an ordinary citizen just like us. It was the way in which she circumvented the legislative process by bringing an issue right to the people. I think that can be an important piece of our climate change puzzle. But in order to really affect climate change, we know we're going to need to have a heavy dose of innovation. We typically think of innovation as that new product that's changing our lives. But innovation is about much more than that, and it's happening all around us. Innovation is about connecting the unconnected. How can we connect disparate things to create something entirely new? What if we connected carbon taxation with tax activism and ballot initiatives? How could that union positively affect climate change? Well, what we do know is that a single activist like Barbara, in a single state, is just not going to be enough. But did you know there are 24 states that permit ballot initiatives? Just imagine if 24 tax crusaders introduced a carbon tax in each of those states. Implementing a carbon tax at the state level will require grassroots campaigning and plenty of time to get ready. We would need to do three things. We would need to inspire and attract others towards this great cause. We would need to collect a lot of signatures, and I mean a lot of signatures by state residents in support. And we would have to spread the word about this ballot measure, maybe through some kind of a social media-fueled uprising, something like the Ice Bucket Challenge, for example. Something for people to rally behind. Would this be easy? No. This wouldn't be easy, but it is achievable. Make no mistake, this has never been done before. Never has a single issue been taken to the voters in all 24 states that permit direct democracy. Other issues like legalizing marijuana or same-sex marriage have been on the ballot in a handful of states, but never anything close to the 24 that permit ballot initiatives. And that is the power of this idea. Residents of nearly half of our states coming together and addressing a single important issue like this on a single election day would create a referendum on climate change in this country that we have never seen before. But you may be asking, how can 24 U.S. states possibly make a dent on this global climate change problem? Well, history tells us there's something called the tipping point of taxation. Great government ideas that work spread really fast to other governments, especially tax ideas. They love to borrow great ideas from each other. These 24 states would influence other states, and eventually, who knows, maybe even the federal government. Maybe someday we could have a national carbon tax. And why stop there? Other countries permit direct democracy. Maybe this approach could work there too. I'll leave you with this. We know we must change our behavior to curb climate change. Taxes influence our behavior, and we can influence the tax laws. Taxes demonstrate what we value. They can be a tool for social change, the device that allows generations to live on this planet. Thank you.
This has been Better Innovation from EY. Let us know what you think about the show by leaving a review or by reaching out to Jeff at jeffrey.saviano@ey.com or find him on Twitter at Jeffrey Saviano. Better Innovation is produced by the great team at Hogarth Worldwide.